That's great, Stevie. Thank you very much. So this is welcome to the management panel as part of the First Music Contact Regional Development Plan, these series of professional development panels. And we're very, very happy to be joined by three fine Irish managers tonight in Tara, Trevor, and Dan. So what we're going to do for the next kind of like 45 minutes so is just talk to them about the art of management. Like I'm going to start by asking all three of them, starting with Tara, just to say hello, introduce themselves, tell us how you got into management and who you currently manage. Tara.
Um, I got into management in 2005. I worked for a manager called Jazz Summers as a day-to-day on Snow Patrol, Badly Drawn Boy, and Gang of Four. And then from there, I went to Q Prime and set up the London office. They're a big American management company. I worked there for 17 years. I left last year to set up my own company, and which is Tea Time. There I signed The Murder Capital, Nell Maskell, The Last Dinner Party, a band called Feet, Declan McKenna, and a band called Peace, and initially did day to day on Foals and Snow Patrol as well. So I moved from day to day manager to manager about 15, 14 years ago. My
Okay.
my main skill and love is developing new bands. So at the moment, I'm developing Bold Love, formerly Big Love, and Clifford's, and I have two new artists that I can't mention yet, but that I will be managing within a couple of weeks.
Excellent stuff. Well, listen, thank you very much for giving up your time to come along this evening. Really appreciate it. Trevor, tell us about yourself. Trevor,
Do you get me?
I got you. How are you?
How's it going? Trevor Dietz, I manage Fontaine's DC. How did I start? I would have started kind of in venues in Dublin. And yeah, just kind of, I suppose, developed a desire to management from dealing with so many bands throughout many years in the Dublin scene. And then, yeah, just went and made a move with Fontaine's DC. And we've been together 10 years now.
Well, okay,
Yeah.
that's not time. So basically, were you tempted to manage any other acts before Fontaine CC?
Yeah. I mean, basically in Dublin, I suppose in the noughties in Dublin, there was I call it the kind of the golden age of Irish and Dublin music. Um, and there was so many acts that were coming through, particularly through my club night at the time, Radiator. We would have had bands like Humanzy, The Things, Republic of Loose, just amazing acts that really couldn't get any recognition across the UK, true to whatever, true to their own kind of misfortune and I suppose lack of interest from the UK at the time as well. And around that time, yeah, there was a band that came through. They were called Andalusia. I really thought that they could do something, but when it actually came to outlining the work that would be involved and the commitment that would be involved to, taking the next step, they kind of shied away from it. So, yeah, there was a couple of bands who I would have liked to work with, but I don't think they were ready to put the work in a sense.
Okay, that's the important line we'll be coming back to. So, Trevor, thanks very much for joining us. Thanks for your time as well. We'll get into it. Dan, welcome along, welcome on board. Do you want to tell us about your management, your journey to management?
Yeah, I do a few different things, probably less formal than the lads. Like I suppose, yeah, always been really into music. I would have DJ'd really, would have DJ'd for Trev and had the honor of DJing with Trev at times. And I did manage an act kind of accidentally a couple of good few years, about 8 years ago, who got signed and learned a bit from that. But I wasn't really in it. I suppose what my heart wasn't in it. And then look, my dated like what I've been doing for quite a long time is running a football club. It's actually quite a lot of similarities with football and music. And then I met Kneecap and managed Kneecap now since 2019. Kind of accidentally, to be honest. Like I met them in a pub. They were in Dublin and kind of just became, I suppose, friends. And then they kind of asked me, did I want to manage them? And I suppose like where it is today since 2019 is worlds apart, but ultimately they were great people and that was my motivation really for kind of getting involved with the lads. That I like them, and there were people that I wanted to spend time with and wanted to see do well, as opposed to having any particular ambitions around myself as a manager or anything like that. And now it's come to a really good place. So yeah, I'd say I more fell into it than I never set out to manage a band, or gave it any consideration really, to be fair. So it's just kind of happened.
Okay. Who's the band you managed before that's down the deal?
Was a guy called Sean O'B who was signed to Universal as Sean O'B, but would have been before that in a band that some people may or may not see, maybe Trev had seen, called Triple Drop, who would have played sort of a kind of punk act, would have played around Dublin. And yeah, it was like short amount of time, put a lot of work into it, but I just didn't feel at the time it was something that particularly found really motivating or whatever, you know.
Great stuff. Well, listen, I really appreciate Dan coming along tonight as well. Really enjoy to have you. Good to have you along. So let's start with Tara. Tara, you said something interesting there. You said that the biggest kick you got out of kind of like, I mean, the management side of things was developing the talent. You know, like obviously developing talent takes some time. You mentioned some bands there that you'd worked with previously. Like, I mean, you talked about things like bands like the Murder Capital. You talked about bands like Last Dinner Party. You know, so obviously we know who those bands are right now, but like tell us a little bit about like, I mean, the amount of work that goes into kind of getting a band from that early stage to a stage where people actually recognize the name, where they've got releases and a bit of a profile. And also, does there come a time during that kind of profile building phase where you kind of go, or the band kind of go like, Jesus, this isn't working out, and what happens then?
Oh God, yeah. There's more that don't than do. I think the fundamental requirement is that obviously the band have to be able to write good songs. The live side isn't such a thing for me. You can work on that. No band is great at the beginning, but it's the songs, and then secondly is their attitude. And if they want to work hard, then if you're going to put in 100%, you need them to put in 100%. And for me, it's enjoyable because it's when everyone's, I don't want to say innocent because that's slightly derogatory, but when there's just the desire there and the energy, and everybody gets happy about, like in Clifford's case last night, selling out 150 cap venue in London. It's being there for the first, I think, is the most delightful point of it. Obviously, once you get your first arena in and you sell it out, that's all. There's lots of great moments, but for me, it's when they do those gigs that you see them step up a level, like they go up when they need to go up, and you see it there in front of you, and that's like incredibly rewarding. And also when it's a small team, when it's you and them and crew, that to me is the most enjoyable time. Not that it's not enjoyable later on, but it's just it's like that core, and ideally those people stay with you all the way through it. So everyone the band feels safe and everything. So I think it's songs, it's attitude, and then it's all the excitement and the rush of when they send in a demo and it's just absolutely banging, and this is gonna be a really big song. They're the
Right. Do you find as well, kind of, Tara, that when you start working with a new act, that you've already got kind of like you because you've worked for so long, and because you've kind of worked with so many different acts, all those acts have different teams. We talked earlier on this spread of a network that happens when you build a team around it. Do you kind of find that when you hear a new act and they move you, and you're kind of thinking, okay, I need to find out more about that? Are you already thinking about the people you can put that act with, in terms of a label, in terms of publisher, in terms of whatever it is?
yeah yeah definitely.
Yeah, and like, do you also kind of find as well that when you begin to sell that act to that team, that like are the team you're bringing on board, are they trusting you because of the kind of like your previous record, and they actually worked with before, and the fact they know that you're someone that you're straight up?
No, I don't think so, because I think no one's going to work on something that they don't think will work. It's their time and effort as well. There's been a couple of bands that I've sent to people, producers and all sorts, who've turned around and said no, because they didn't think it was good enough. And I've done loads with them before, so no, I don't think so. I wouldn't do that.
Okay,
I
great.
a band because the producer sent it, is a really good producer.
Okay, Trevor, like to turn to you then. Like, I mean, both you and Dan. Like, I mean, you're as far as I know, both of you are kind of one act people right now. You're the Fontaines guy. There isn't another band. You haven't taken any other band since, have you?
No. No.
Okay. Are you tempted to take on another band, or is it a case at the moment that the amount of work that's involved there, you're kind of going like you've been with them for 10 years, you've been there every step of the journey from those kind of like those five band bashes and the workmans right up to kind of like bands sell out American tour. Is that enough for you, or are you kind of thinking does it come a stage where you're thinking I'd like to take on another act?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, I didn't have the ability, probably, I don't know, or maybe it's slightly ADHD, hyper focus in an inability to even fathom how managers can take on other acts, and I really admire that. But it's just not something I could do. I think for me, it wasn't, the move to management wasn't really about becoming a manager. It was about managing Fontaines DC, and it was kind of it was a plan that I put in place, about 10 years before seeing Fontaines DC. It was out of frustration. It was out of all these bands, as I said, in the noughties in Dublin that didn't quite make it. They were that close. We famously had Humanzy get that £1 million deal, and then the arse fell out of the music industry due to Napster, etc., etc. So it was really, for me, it was not allowing that happen again. The next great band that I would see come through Dublin, I didn't want to see in 20. I didn't want to be talking about that band in 20 years' time, saying they could have. So really, it was totally about Fontaines DC. It was about not allowing another band not make it from Dublin, and then it was okay. And then I'll review things myself and see where the band is at and where I can possibly look at another act. I'm not actively looking at the moment, but it's not something I'll rule out. Yeah, it's
Okay. Like along the way with Fontaine CC, you've hooked up with kind of like a bigger management company in wildlife in kind of like in M and Greengrass and Ian Andrews. So like you work with them. Do you want to talk a little bit about like why you decided to kind of throw your lot in with them and like how that works on a day-to-day basis?
well, basically, we 2018 was the year we broke. We put out independently. We put out Liberty Bell in May 2017. You got that record, Jim. We then followed it up with October 2017 with Hurricane Laughter as a second single. We had a bit of interest in terms of people starting to type a look at the band, in terms of like agents, slight interest from labels. Everyone really passed on us at the time. And then we moved with Checkless Reckless, and that just blew. And that kind of, I'm sitting here in Seattle, that kind of got us our first KEXP session, etc., unsigned. We made it happen. But 2018 was the kind of the first test of what was to come, and 2019 blew, and it went insane. And at that stage, I was tour manager, accountant, and everything. So I said, I need to build an existing infrastructure around this band now. Otherwise I'm going to crumble, and the band is going to crumble. We had signed the record deal with Partizan, but it kind of got to the stage where I feared good things happening, because the band was so it was just there was no time to take the foot off the gas, and I really felt it was going to damage the band and damage our relationship. And so I brought in, I asked Wildlife to come in, Emma and Ian, and apply their financial management. So that kind of took, I don't need to be the accountant anymore. I don't need to talk the band about money and stuff like that. So it was existing infrastructure around the band that I needed, and it's worked out really well. And then on a day-to-day basis now, I mean, I suppose, for example, on a day like today, it would be the ability, like it's 10 a.m. now in Seattle, But at 2 a.m. our time, we put out 2 new singles and announced the Guinness Factory show. If it was still in its current guise in 2019, I would have probably be doing that myself. So the structure and the day-to-day in place there, Shivani from Wildlife, that means I don't have to do that stuff while I'm on a flight or jet lag to bits. So yeah, it's just there's no real kind of adoption of certain roles, and there's no strict roles. I personally would be very much around the lads' schedule and scheduling and ensuring that stuff doesn't come in that would affect the lads' time off and stuff like that. I'm extremely protective of that. Press, PR would all kind of land at me, and I would structure that out and put that out in front of the bands, etc., etc. And then, directly working with the label and stuff on video and stuff like that would be really Emma Greengrass from Wildlife. And she would take on the role of really dealing with directors, label, and being on the ground when the videos are made and stuff like that. And Ian McAndrew would kind of really be his experience in touring and all that is just, it's such a great asset and such a gift to have, within the overall infrastructure around Fontaines DC. So no strict roles. We're all hands on deck. I think it flows well. You there, Jim?
That's good. Sorry, I was muted there. Sorry. Thanks, Trevor. Turn to you, Dan. One thing with Kneecap is basically kind of like it's just that it's more than just a record. I mean, last year with the film as well, that kind of just put the band on a completely different level. Do you want to talk a bit about the planning behind a band like Kneecap in terms of both the live, both the movie and both the record as well, and how all that's come together in the last couple of years?
Yeah, probably more in a position that Trev spoke about prior to Wildlife, to be fair now, than where he is in terms of his organisation with it. There was an awful lot going on in the last year. Like you said there, we took the last 2 years, there was filming for the feature-length film and no kind of idea of how that would turn out, and there was a big risk around that film. We've spoken about that. I wasn't sure. Ultimately, ended up in favour, but it wouldn't have been something that was we definitely have to do that, because it could have been really bad, and it would have been released if it was really bad. That's the nature of filming. But we kind of obviously that going on at the same time writing a record. Just year and a half ago, signed to Heavenly. Had been meeting a lot of majors who Kneecap were essentially too risky for and wouldn't have worked anyway. Trevor mentioned Partisan, and Partisan and Heavenly were the two labels I met where, first of all, they were both straight up. Partisan ultimately didn't end up wanting to sign them, but were very honest and upfront about their views, and the conversations came to an end. I found with a lot of majors that they kind of didn't want to say no and wanted to change what the band was about, and whether that was the language or some of their political elements or whatever, there were things that they wanted to change, and we weren't willing to change anything. So you'd label discussions, filming for feature-length film, planning for release feature-length film, recording of the first album. The first album was done without fine art. What was done without Heavenly, that arrived as a ready-made piece of work for Heavenly, and obviously then around rebrand of the band, change of logo, and kind of been involved in everything from the financial side, which I still mostly do. We have an accountant, but it spans everything really, and trying to manage all that at the same time, whilst also having a full-time job, was pretty difficult, to say the least. But I suppose now, bringing Heavenly on board was key, and the right kind of label. I'm so happy in hindsight that someone at Polydor or Island or someone didn't take a punt and offer Kneecap a record deal, because it just would have been the wrong decision. And we really did find the right people there, really people who have a huge love of music, and everything else comes from that, and not setting out to have some kind of commercial plan, which is exactly the kind of people that we want to work with. And Kneecap, looking, obviously all the other bits, building the live shows. Live shows were growing considerably anyway, prior to movie or anything like that. And as was the level of production we were putting in, the growth of the social media and merchandise. There's really a lot of elements with Kneecap. It's now, I kind of find with the band, that it's a live driven band totally. You go and experience a gig, and that's really where you get hooked into Kneecap and what the film did, and couldn't have predicted it. There aren't any examples really of a music biop about a band before they're famous. You've all the Beatles and Cyndi Lauper and Eminem and all these where there's a ready-made audience, but because it worked out so well, it's sort of like a fast forward. It's sort of like someone goes to see that film, and whether they're in LA or Japan or Australia or Leitrim, it doesn't matter. They go and they see the movie, and it's a true representation of the lads, although bits are dramatized. And then when they come to a gig, that builds upon what they've just seen in the cinema, because what they've seen is pretty much real. It's how the lads pretty much behave. And there's lots of scenes where I kind of said to myself when I first seen it, this is exactly how they'd be. Is this even acting? You know, this is them. Which has meant that when people go to a show now, it's just fast forward the fandom side. So yeah, I don't know, like I know your question was more, I don't know how we really balanced it all. It was really a big challenge, but sort of maybe like Trev in terms of like he wanted to manage the Fontaines. Like we have a really close unit with the band, and it never felt like loads of work. Because you know it was all such good stuff and done with the right politics and the right outlook, and there'd be things that'd be very important to me and to the lads. So it
Mm.
never felt like we were moving towards some kind of financial goal or anything like that. It was more just the essence of the band being brought to more people.
Did you find that you talked there about like going with Jeff Barrett and Heavenly rather than going with kind of like a major label? In terms of the other components, Dan, of the kind of like of the team, and you're obviously kind of like been doing a lot still, but in terms of kind of like the live side, the publishing side, that's like those kind of people. Did you find it easy enough to gauge people in terms of when people come for? Was it the case of you saw someone coming and you saw they had a breadhead on them and you went, that's not going to work for us? Was it easy to kind of rule people in and rule people out?
Yeah, I generally go on people I like, and you know that doesn't always work, but I suppose like we were unusual in that we had a publishing deal way before we had a record deal, and that's with Mute Song, with Pepe there at Mute, and they came to us, and other people like even when it came to choosing bookers, any of those kind of decisions, I just kind of I'd want to meet someone and have a long conversation with them, not about actually the band, about other things, you know, and I remember like when we did go to Booker, and we're with Ed from Primary Talent now in Europe. Like I remember meeting Ed and chatting to Ed for 2 or 3 hours about his kids, about the North, about Ireland, about Brexit, about all kinds of things, and getting a feel for him as a person, and then kind of going from there. And I met people from Live Nation, just felt it was straight in. I felt like it talking to a car salesman at times or things, you know. And that's kind of the approach that we've taken. Look, that's somebody told me a long time ago, a fella who owns venues, that he kind of meets someone, and even if they tick all the boxes, he kind of asks himself, would I like to go for a pint with this person? And if the answer to that is no, he doesn't work with them. And I've always kind of used that as a bit of a rule of thumb. And look, it can be wrong, but it's generally right. And if you're going to work with people, I think first and foremost, you have to want to like what they're about, and who they are and what their outlook is and things.
Mhm.
Because everyone, look, whether you have a label, a publisher, or anyone else coming, a booking agent, they're all going to tell you what you want to hear for the most part. If they know what they're talking about, they're going to say we can do X, Y, and Z. But is it someone you want to work with and that you want associated with this close unit of people who have strong conviction in terms of what they're about? Does somebody else align with that? That'd be something I would have found really important. So I didn't particularly find building those different elements hard. Once I felt that, you know, and look, there were really lucky things. I like to say Joe Brawley. Joe's given us free legal advice. He likes what the lads are about, and we found that because of the stance they take on things, that people tend to be willing to help Kneecap out, because they like what the lads stand for.
Mm. How's Joe on music business contracts?
Say that again.
How's Joe on music business contracts?
He's good at suing the British government anyway.
Perfect
Go
answer.
on.
Perfect answer. Moving back to Tara. Tara, like you talked kind of like about like I mean when you were starting out first of all like in terms of kind of like the day-to-day management and what you were doing at the very start. I'm curious about like the changes you see of the manager's role over the last kind of like 20 years. Do you think kind of like the stuff that manager's doing, and having listened to Trevor and kind of Dan talking about what they're doing for Fontaines DC and Kneecap respectively, do you think kind of like the manager really is kind of like now the fulcrum on which all the team is resting?
Oh, I think more so than ever, yeah. The labels had a lot more control 30 years ago.
Mm.
Um, they don't now. You know, you've got Uber management companies like Wildlife who've got, you know, people in there covering loads of different departments. Managers' offices used to just be a manager, accountant, and a couple of day-to-days, but now they have a digital team, they have a video marketing team, they have all sorts. And I think, if anything, I think management companies are the future. And I think that's what the change is. It's not just one little office anymore. It's like 3 or 4 floors, and in Q Prime's case, 5 offices around the world. I think that the manager's role, there's more. Obviously, we're all much like Trevor touched on it there. We're all much more aware of mental health, keeping the schedules clear on time off and things like that. That was never. I once literally carried the lead singer into a TV because they were so exhausted they just couldn't do it, and they were given a B12 and put in front of the cameras. Like that just wouldn't happen now. So it's much better now. They have much more control.
Mm. So I'm curious about kind of something else about like I mean the acts you're taking on now, the new acts you're taking on. And when you meet them for the first time, obviously they know your track record. You know in terms of kind of like what they sound like, and you probably don't know a history of the band, or someone may have told you about the band. What are the questions that these bands ask you that make you kind of realize this band is for me? And also, what are the questions they ask that make you realize this band is not for me?
I think it's if they're not running before they can walk, if they're asking questions about how they start rather than how they cope with getting there. If they're asking questions about music, about producers, about records I've worked on rather than artists I've worked. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yes.
if they ask how and where was this record made, who did this, how long did it take them to write that, rather than where do they live, how much do they earn? You can just tell a genuine musician from the wannabe musicians.
Yeah.
And it's separating the wheat from the chaff, but it's very easy to suss out.
Yeah. One thing you've mentioned, actually, all three of you have mentioned, but like it's just the kind of like the work ethic of the band. Like Trevor said in terms of Fontaines, he could see that wants to work. Like Dan said about when he met Kneecap for the first time, they knew what they wanted. It's like how important is that work ethic? Because I keep saying to Axe when it comes to choosing the manager, that sometimes kind of like the manager wants to see the fact that you're working to begin with. They don't want to hire someone who's lazy bones, who's going to hand that basically they want to hand everything over to you. They agree that contract.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, I always say I can't want it more than you want it. And there have been examples where I've wanted it more than they've wanted it, and where I'm doing all the work and coming up with all the ideas. That's not how it should run. My job is to facilitate their ideas, occasionally, give my ideas as well. But if they're not coming forward with a plan of what they want and how they see it, then I can't go and make that happen. And if you do force your own thing on it and push for an idea, they're going to turn around and say they don't like it and it was all a waste of time. So it has to come from them. Like the last dinner party, they turned up at all these label meetings with a 14-page manifesto, and they had mood boards for the artwork and the first album cover and the first video, and it was insane. That's an anomaly. That doesn't usually happen, but they always have an idea of like their aesthetic and where they want to go and where they see themselves. So it's just if you gel with that, then it's you're in. It's like going for a job interview, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. But it's also going for a job interview with both sides, that both sides are kind of like asking the questions as well, which I find fascinating, because an awful lot of times with acts that they think kind of like, oh great, we should be really, really grateful this manager's working with us. Where actually, like, basically the manager is the employee in many ways. They're being hired to kind of like to carry out to execute the band's plan, action the band's plan.
Yeah, I mean, I've when I was at Q Prime, there were some bands I went for that we didn't get. And I get it. Like Dan was saying about major labels, Q Prime's a major management company. And I could see why these bands didn't come to us. It wasn't the right fit. It was gutting, but it wasn't right. And I always understood it. I got more than I didn't get. But since I've been independent, I don't get bands for other reasons because they want the big all guns blazing management company, and I can't provide that for a while, So I'm a firm believer in, if it's meant to be, it'll be. If someone comes into your life and it works, they were meant, that was meant to happen.
There will be some people on the call who are not musicians who are, like, want to work in the industry, and I'm curious about what you said there about the future being management companies. In terms of skill sets for management companies, obviously they've got managers, they've got accountants. What are the missing gaps? What are the things you've seen from working with Q Prime, from setting up on your own? What are the missing skill sets that a management company should be thinking about, or that you think someone should be kind of going, if you want to work in music and you want to work at a management company, these are the areas you should think about?
God, I think it's dependent on the band, really. Like, I don't, I think you can have a perfectly successful career and not be successful in America. America really kills people at the beginning, you know, long tours in vans. It's not it's not a pleasant experience initially. It gets there when you can afford decent hotels and stuff. So things like that for me, I think are no longer really important. Like you can just do stuff at your own pace as well. I don't believe that you should be pushed when yeah, I don't believe that you should let labels and people push you into doing stuff. And I think the management company's role, because it includes the day-to-days as well, is is to make sure that everyone's listening and everyone knows, you know, what's being said, more importantly, what isn't being said, and can just keep a lid on everything. And it's like the sort of pacifier in the middle, I suppose.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Like I mean, there's lots to kind of take out of that, and that kind of leads me to my next question, which is going back to Trevor. And kind of like one of the things you've seen, Trev, is kind of like I mean, you've seen how a band that you kind of like means put on the early days has grown so much. What are the mistakes you made along the way? What are the things you made along the way that you look back now, aside from kind of like the not sleeping bits? What are the bits you look back on and kind of go to yourself, we should have done that differently. Yeah, I know it's all worked out fine, and I know it's great to be kind of like me in the middle of that tour. But sometimes you learn more from those mistakes. And what do you think they were?
I think it kind of it goes back to what Tara was saying. I think particularly there's one kind of mistake which was kind of accidental, I suppose, and it was something that nobody could help. But there was a real kind of desire for me to get the band in a position, you know, without going into major debt, and therefore get the band into a position where they could have a relatively decent wage. So I sacrificed that and took on the role myself as tour manager with the band, which was fine in the very, very early days. But there was one incident where I wasn't allowed into America, and that screwed my visa. And I didn't have a tour manager in place, and I just had drivers and stuff like that for the band. And America, when a band is skint, is a really, really difficult place to put a band into. And I always feel that had I been there, I would have been there to protect and change things, and it always stays with me. There was an absolute screw up with my passport and visa into America through really, really bad US record label legal advice. So it was kind of taken out of my hands in a way. But the bottom line is I wasn't in America with the band at one of their first grueling US tours. And it's a really, as Tara said, America is a shit place for bands to tour in the early days. You can't easily buy fruit. It's a very, very strange place when you get into middle America. There's no such thing as a band just buying an apple or an orange. It's insane. So food goes out the window, you know, whatever happens. And the band aren't in good nick. And after 30 days, you get a very, very broken band back. And that will always stay with me. So I think there's an admiration in going in and trying to make your band as financially independent as they possibly can be as early as possible, and avoiding debt and avoiding unnecessary expenditure. There's you know, that's a good thing, but to in the event of mistakes like was made on that tour in America, it's a bad thing. Mm-hmm. So I should have had a tour manager rather than myself in place on that tour.
So. Yeah. Okay, so that's a pretty honest kind of like mistake to admit to as well, you know. And like, but what I find really interesting from all three of you is like the things you're talking there about kind of like and you're right, you can't buy a banana in kind of like in Boise, Idaho. It's impossible, you know. So it's like it's that sort of like maintenance. It's that sort of like that self-care stuff. And it strikes me as well from all three of you that it has become ultra important, because you can't do like kind of like Tara was talking about, like just drag a musician into a studio, stick a B12 injection in their arm and hope they're going to perform, because that doesn't wash anymore.
Oh no, and it would be absolutely sick. And I mean, there is times, especially in a band's early career, and where the label and the band and the management they're all as equally determined, which is a brilliant thing. It's an amazing thing to have a label behind you that's as ambitious as the band, and everyone being equally ambitious. But at the same time, you have to say no to certain things, and yeah, I think the manager is ultimately there, even though you can have your digital department and have your accountancy department and have all those things, but there needs to be someone to say no, and this is not happening. And but there will be, particularly early in a band's career, there will be someone, but this offers such an opportunity to reach such an audience, and it's, well, look, we have to sacrifice that. We can't hit that audience right now. You can't cover everyone.
Yeah, there's always a reason, isn't there?
There's always a reason, and it can be, and sometimes when you're an independent manager, you can almost come out of saying no, kind of going and second guessing yourself slightly, kind of going, am I doing? Does this lack ambition? Does this take away an opportunity from the band? But you learn very soon after that ambition, that kind of opportunity actually wasn't that important, and the band survives without it. That TV show in France at 8 a.m. in the morning that you didn't do, it doesn't change the dial,
Bring Dan back into the conversation now, and one of the things you've had to kind of, I suppose, cope with Kneecap is that I'm just kind of curious about how you handle the fact that when you started working with the band, first of all, they were Gaeilge girls from Belfast. They had their own kind of thing going on, and you were as an outsider slotting into kind of like that machine. Did you find at the start, was it easy to kind of make those inroads, to make that relationship work? And what were the things you learned when you put that relationship together?
Yeah, no, it happened way easier than it should have, and it'll sound like a strange thing to say, but see, my family growing up, were Republicans, and it sounds like a weird, but so were the lads, and even down to I know a lot of weird songs that most people wouldn't know. They're like old Republican weird songs that existed in the early 1970s and stuff. So we had this, I remember when I first met them, I've, just some of my older uncles and that have life experience that would be very similar to the lads' uncles. Just in terms of, maybe being involved in a Republican movement and maybe being in jail and things like that are very unusual experiences for people from Dublin, but we had that kind of commonality, and that's unusual, and it's rare, and it came out, I suppose, when we first met, when they were down in Dublin in, even just singing a few songs. But I'd know songs that just, and it's just because of that unusual set of circumstances with particularly with uncles that I'd have. And that made, I suppose, the whole thing. And before I did any of this, I would have studied international conflict, and I know a lot about the North. I'm not from the North.
Do you think studying international conflict is a good way for a manager to begin?
I don't know. We found with the lads, I suppose, is that I suppose what their sense of who they are and their identity is more important than anything, and the music is essentially a conduit to kind of communicate that, and I suppose to have a sense and an understanding, not fully, because I didn't grow up in Belfast or in Derry with JJ in the Cregan, but I suppose that sense of who they are is ultimately the driving force behind everything they do, and I suppose to have an understanding that was slightly greater than other people, and to be able to relate to that early on, I suppose, put us in the position where I didn't feel like an outsider. I did, from a language point of view, obviously, not being a fluent Irish speaker, and you're really, you can feel really Irish, and then you're around a group of people who speak Irish, you can quickly feel a lot less Irish. But they never used that as a weapon against anyone. They wouldn't do it. And the other thing about fitting in was, it might sound like something you just say, but it's true. They don't have any ego to treat them. It's a really, really unusual quality. They just don't have. It's not something they possess. They treat everybody exactly the same in terms of meeting people, and that's an amazing quality. So now I never felt like I was slotting into something. We just got on really well, and Tara said it earlier around, it was meant to be. When my partners in music, and when I met them, they recognized her That we were in a bar and they recognized her, and we all got chatting, and it just kind of felt like we'd always known each other. It kind of doesn't feel like a business relationship, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask you a kneecap related question. Just something Tara said, and she was talking about the last dinner party and like the fact that they had a manifesto, they were very clear about their visual stuff. Am I right in thinking like kneecap kind of like knew exactly what they want to do, how they want to go about it, and your job was just to kind of like implement that as well as just advise them of any kind of like corners you saw or you saw coming around the corner?
No, they wouldn't have been as developed as that. Like it was more like the lads didn't set out, like, and they've said this, they didn't set out to make a band. Like they weren't people who wanted to be in a band or studied music or anything like that. JJ like plays guitar and Nisha plays flute and Limo can play a bit of guitar, but it wasn't something that they set out to do. They were angry and frustrated as young people about how the Irish speaking community were being treated in West Belfast. And their way of communicating that anger and to kind of connecting with other people was to release Carta, but that wasn't, they didn't release that track and say we're going to become a hip hop actor or anything like that. It literally just, it sort of happened, I suppose, in reverse. And then I think that they saw, and I tried to communicate to them, the power of music in terms of, music can be a great force to kind of communicate good things. And I always felt, I feel it for everything, whether it's a band, a cafe, a football club, anything I've been involved in. If you do something that is essentially a good thing, and you do it well, and it stands for something, that the kind of people who'll get involved in that will really get invested in it. Will really get invested in it. And I kind of like remember when I personally, whenever I was into music, like say there's bands like, and nothing wrong with them, like say someone like Keane, like who are Keane? Like who are they? Can I relate to them on any level? No. They had great songs and they had good commercial success. But you think of someone like, you think of Fontaines, Mary, a lot of the new Irish acts, I think you can really relate to who they are. Mary Wallopers, Lankin, they stand for things beyond what the music is. It's still amazing music. And I think that the lads more came from it, that music was that, like, they didn't come with a 14-page manifesto. They had certain iconography that they developed themselves. Obviously, they developed using, the kind of Republican imagery and the conflict imagery of the North that was sort of a taboo. And that was a moment where it seemed to be accepted, and there was an element to look in that this was the turning point where, people could kind of look with more of a humorous eye on things that were previously maybe symbolic of quite dark things. And that was something that they had decided upon. The tricolour balaclava that's become like the symbol of the band nearly, might have seemed like I wasn't involved in that. And if that came to me, I probably would have said, that's a bit playful, it's a bit childish, but it's a great idea, it works. So they were less formed around the manifesto, here's the visuals, let's implement that, but very clear on what the purpose of the band would be, if that makes sense.
Excellent. It does. Yeah, that's great. This has been a great conversation for the last 3 quarters an hour. So what I want to do now is I just want to kind of like turn to the audience and just kind of like get some questions from them. So there's some questions in the chat field, isn't there, Stevie? There are, yeah. Okay, so let's see now where questions are. Actually, there was a question earlier on that I kept back, and this is a question basically for all three of you, and whichever one you can kind of start. And it's from Kez on the call, and the question is, how should you discuss money with potential management?
Well, you got to make it first.
Elaborate on that, Tara.
I wouldn't. Do you mean money as in how much the manager's going to take, or
I think that's the question. I think that.
Oh, right. Well, then in that case, you get a good lawyer, and you get the lawyer to do the negotiating for you, and then you half the legal fees between the artist and the manager if you end up signing to them.
Okay. Does Dan or Trev want to answer that?
Yeah, well, I'd like to see Tara's got the value of experience there in so many acts. Like I for years didn't take a cent off the lads. I didn't want it. I didn't feel it was appropriate. I had a job myself. I wouldn't have been comfortable. Not that that's the right thing to do. It's probably the wrong thing to do, but it was the approach I took. And I knew what their income was, and I was like, look, I don't want it. They were always trying to give me money, and now that things have changed, I get a certain amount of money. But it was, I think Tara's advice is the correct advice. It probably would have felt too formal and unnatural, and because of the way things have developed with us. But I think it's the correct approach, although easier said than done if you've got an emotional link, or you know what I mean. So I think what it is, I think I'd support her advice, although it's not the way we did it.
Okay.
I would say actually, Dan, you've raised a point there that I forgot to mention. Yeah, I don't commission until the band makes money, and I think any manager that does is not in it for the right reasons. You shouldn't.
100%.
The manager and agent, the agent will always make money. They're 10%, whatever you're doing. There's nothing you can do about that. But I think any manager that does it, you shouldn't sign. So actually, that's a good thing to point out then, Kez, is that when you are talking to a manager, you just say, at what point do you start commissioning? And if they commission before you're making money, then I wouldn't go near it.
It's a red flag.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
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 Trevor, would you agree with that?
100%. Yeah. You can't. I mean, you couldn't possibly commission on a band when they're in a period of making nothing. It's about, I think at the beginning, it's about, really trying to get the band as much money as possible where you can. I was in a privileged position where I was able to get the lads DJ sets in the Workman's and Garage Bar, and help them get a few quid into their pocket, because the early stages is skin. So you couldn't possibly try and commission until a band is actually making a wage, we would say.
Right. Okay. That's good.
That takes time.
That's a good, honest answer. Great. And it's another question here from Caroline, and it's advice you give for developing emerging artists aside from live performance and showcase. What are the key steps to pushing forward every day as a manager and raising the profile of your act? That's before record deals and sync are in the mix. Like, I suppose it's about kind of like starting that momentum and keeping that momentum going. Have you any advice? Any pointers regarding that?
I'd probably say like authenticity, but again, it's something I'd apply to everything and not just music. What is the, like, what is it about the band or the artist that's really unique to them ideally, but what are the really true parts to this in terms of like their motivation, where they're from, whatever it is, what's the really, and make sure that, that's something that you're consistent on in terms of communicating that, whether that's media interviews or other things you might do, just being clear on what that is, nearly beyond the music, or if it relates to the music, the motivation or whatever, but just what are the key things that are like, this is who you or they are as in an artist, and making sure that's consistent in terms of communicating that and build on that would be what I'd say.
Cool.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Okay. There's another question here as well. This question from Eve, and so it's a very good question, because I don't think in any three of your cases this was a particular kind of like, thing you looked for. I'm assuming it wasn't, but maybe you'll admit to it was. Like, what parts does social media profiles play in how you look at acts, or how you regard acts at the very start when you're scouting for new talent in the first place? Tara, doesn't matter how, if a band is good on the TikToks or a band is good on the Instagrams like Trevor, you know what I mean? Like, doesn't matter.
You're looking for musicians, not digital.
Yes.
When I accidentally walked in on the Fontaines when they were playing in the Workman's, which wasn't a show I had booked there. It was part of some college thing. Accidentally walked in, saw about 30 seconds of them, went, wow. Immediately came out of the room and found out their name and looked up their Facebook page. And they had done 2 gigs prior to that show that I caught a minute of. And I absolutely fell in love with them, purely because they said they didn't try and sell the artist anything. They didn't use those, or the fan anything. They didn't use those horrible lines like, it's going to be a great night. They just put down that they were playing there, and they didn't even use a picture of themselves. They used a picture of Shane McGowan. And I thought, yeah, these guys, there was no please, it was just, we're playing here, it's free in, picture of Shane. That was it. I went, okay. So
yeah. It was authentic.
Most bands hate doing social media.
Exactly.
Yeah. The thing about it is, Tara, is basically like, what that often happens is they're told by a label or a manager to do social media, and if the band have any sense, they suddenly think, hang on a second, they're not on social media themselves, so why am I on social media giving it all away?
Well, I mean, it's absolutely vital. We can't do what we do without it. But I think, again, authenticity through every aspect of how a band comes across is the most important thing. So if a band is not into putting their personality across on social media, then they don't do it. They just need to ensure that people know where they're playing and what they're doing. Whereas if a band is mad into social media, let them do it. But you can't create a personality of a band. You can't manufacture a personality of a band through social media.
Yeah, I think at the beginning, though, it might be the time where it is maybe more valuable in that, if you've got an amazing song and you put up a performance of it and people find it, we all know that has worked.
Yeah.
But I think it's not vital, and it certainly isn't part of a manager's decision based, looking at numbers.
Okay. Question here from Eva Do from All Things Eve, and basically it's about the early approach, and like, do you prefer approaching bands and let them approach you? I'm assuming all three of you are getting loads of kind of like me contacts from bands, like me loads of links to SoundCloud, loads of links to Bandcamp, whatever it is. Do you in publishing that's called a slush pile? So do you dive into that slush pile and see what's there, or is it a case of kind of like, our band's approach, is it the approach? What do you reckon is the kind of pull factor? We heard from Trevor what it was in terms of Fontaines. For you, Tara, what's the pull factor that made you kind of go towards the Cliffords, for example?
I like them as people, and then I once signed a band that I didn't apply my rule to, and I regretted it. I have to go and want to watch it every night. If I don't think I could watch that band every night, then I can't do it. It's not, to me, it's not like a product. There are many companies where it's like, okay, you fit this genre, we can put you in that corner and we'll make money off that in these territories. That's not why I do it. I think I just have to go and be able to watch them, and for them to just be nice people. And as I said earlier, it's the songs first and foremost. But
yeah. In terms of Cliffords, did they approach you or did you approach them?
No, I was looking for new I had just launched Tea Time and I was looking for my first signing, and the promoter that runs Ones to Watch in the George in East London sent me the next month's lineup, and I went and checked them out, and Cliffords were headlining. They weren't like I said earlier, they weren't very good live at all, and I'm not they know that. I'm not sort of saying anything they don't know. It was pretty shambolic, but She's a Star, and they just have these really good songs. Whereas actually the Murder Capital, when I went to see them for the first time, they were incredible live. So that was complete, and they had songs as well. So it's not always that the band need polishing up. Sometimes they do come pretty formed.
Yeah. So there's a question here from Neil, and I suppose it kind of falls on from kind of the social media question earlier on, and basically it's kind of like, it's basically about kind of like the vision for the band and that clarity of vision. In his case, he's saying that basically kind of like the music is 100% me and the emotion who he is, and it perfectly informs the art direction, the gigging when it comes. But his downfall is the social media side of things and kind of like what that's about. Do you think kind of like there would be a kind of a good advice of someone like Neil just to forget about social media for the time being, concentrate on the songs, and just leave that for another day, leave that for another time to come true?
I mean, the thing about, I mean, when you're starting out, as Tara said, and I think it's pretty obvious, the focus should be on the artist developing their own songs, and songs, and rehearse, and practice, and write the songs. The social media element, okay, yeah, you want to get your songs out there and engage to a certain extent, but you should be more focused on writing songs at this stage than social media numbers. But if the songs develop and the songs are released, the numbers will come later. But it depends at what stage the songs are at and where the artist is at. But definitely songwriting over social media numbers at the embryonic stage of any artist.
Cool. I'm gonna wrap it up now, because like this has been a great hour. We got everyone involved. We got a good turnout. We had a good night tonight. So I just want to kind of like end it by kind of like going around to the three managers, and if they're to give one piece of advice, just one piece of advice, This is your epitaph. One piece of advice to any of the musicians who are looking for managers right now, and in terms of kind of like, keeping the good face on, keeping the kind of keeping the encourage them to keep going, because an awful lot of people, they get the knockbacks, they're kind of like being focusing too much on the short term. What's the advice? Like, I mean, like, all of you have been involved in the game for quite some time now. It's not overnight success by any stretch of the imagination. It's not. None of you have kind of like are kind of like went from zero to hero in the space of 12 months. So, what advice would you give to acts who are on this call, who are looking for managers, who are looking for a break? Trevor.
Again, just write. Keep writing those songs, and focus less on all the peripheral, even more writing than live shows. Really, and create a very high bar for your songs as well. I mean, if you don't feel that those songs are as good as the artists that you aspire to be, then keep writing. There's no point in going out with stuff that you don't really believe in and you're not a fan of your own music. With Fontaines, they would just, they were the most prolific band you could ever imagine. I think it was about 4 shows in 2016 that we did in the Workman's, and I think there was 8 different songs per set that hadn't been in the previous set. It was just writing. And I think when you get to a point and you actually feel that you've got the confidence in this block of songs that you have, or maybe even 2 songs, then start to go out and worry about, gigging and the other factors that go into a band, and even try and getting a manager. Don't try and get a manager until you're fully confident that you have the songs that you fully believe in and you feel stand up to the writers that you love.
Okay, excellent. Same question to you, Dan. The one piece of advice you give to acts on this call, or actually watching the recording, about kind of like being staying encouraged, staying in the game. What's the advice?
Yeah, I think like Trevor said, is obviously keep writing all the time, but also I suppose not to try and force things. I think like we said a few things we said there around, like, if you don't feel time is right for social media, it's also looking. And I mentioned football is similar to music. Like, there's a reality here, but like there's a load of great music that doesn't end up going anywhere commercially for whatever reason. There's a load of brilliant footballers who don't end up making much money from football, and often it's just something can happen that maybe it's outside of your control. That's maybe the X factor, all these things people give it, that just a stroke of luck with. With Kneecap is timing. If Kneecap around 10 years ago with the very same thing, would that be acceptable to society in terms of North? Probably wouldn't be. They'd be the same people doing the same thing. So I just think that trying not to force it, and maybe, like I mentioned with footballers, it's so similar. There's just so many great footballers, and little thing can happen and suddenly they're playing in England getting 10 grand a week, or they're not, thing off behind me. And I just think that focusing on writing, focusing on what you're about, not getting caught up in trying to do 20 things at once. If like Trev mentioned, you don't have a manager, but really focus on the thing of this is going to be about ultimately the strand using us will come after that, and that's those that are maybe too far that might get you demotivated.
Great stuff, Dan. And finally, over to you, Tara. What's be the one last piece of advice you'd have for an indie accent?
I was gonna say the same as Trev. Like, don't approach anyone until it's perfect, until you think it's perfect. But I'd add one other thing to it. If you're a band, just make sure that everyone in the band is as good as each other, because what you don't want is to start the band and then you've got to get rid of a member and you always knew that person wasn't as good as the others. Like, get it all sorted before you go shopping.
Okay.
Get your eggs in a row, ducks in a row, eggs in your basket.
Eggs in a basket, ducks in a row. Ducks in a row, eggs in a basket. That's a great way to end it. Listen, big thanks to the 3 of you. You're busy people, so we really appreciate Tara, Dan, and Trevor joining us tonight. Big thanks as well to Ruth from the Galway City Arts Office and Amy from the Galway County Arts Office for putting this on. Tomorrow night we are going to be joined. We're going to be going to Stevie.
We have Kieran Darcy from
Which
Warner.
county are we at tomorrow night?
We're doing Roscommon tomorrow.
Roscommon. We're going to Roscommon tomorrow night. And thank you very much, Stevie. We're going to Roscommon tomorrow night. And we're talking to Kieran Darcy, putting the social media campaign together. So again, big thanks to all these people. Massive big thanks to our three great managers. Great to have them on board. Thank you all very much for coming along as well tonight. And we'll see you all tomorrow night. Thank you very much. Good night.
Nice, boys.
Happy birthday,
Bye,
Dan.
folks. Bye-bye.
Free Palestine.
Thank you.
All right.